Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we have Rona, Disciple of Gix, a Proliferate artifact planeswalker kind of mix of a deck with some really interesting ideas and some pretty aggressive plays. This deck comes to us from longtime friend of the channel, John. John, thank you so much for sending this deck. He played it recently with me on an episode of MTG Mudsta, and I don't think this is the exact list he used, but this is the list we're going to be working off of. Now, I think Rona is really cool. This is a character that, at the time, because this was the first time we went back to Dominaria. This was 2018. My goodness, that was 5 years ago. Do you ever feel old? And at the time, Rona was kind of a one-off character, and now obviously since all the second Phyrexian or the third, the most recent Phyrexian invasion, actually the second most because it was Dominaria United and then they invaded again, so the second most recent Phyrexian invasion, she played a much bigger part, and of course we had an even more of a different version of her in the final invasion itself. So this character has a lot of development, and I do really like her. And we're going to see what she does for this deck. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is Rona, Disciple of Gix, and why are they our commander for this kind of mixed of a Proliferate artifact planeswalker deck? So this is, let's read Rona before I say anything. So she's a 3-mana 2/2 in blue and black. When she enters the battlefield, you can exile target historic card from your graveyard, and you can cast that card and any other card she exiles as long as they're not lands. And then for and a tap, you can exile the top card of your library. So this is a very, very specific kind of ability. And so the way John uses this, as he's told me, and I think this is a very interesting way to play this, it's not that she's really the main commander. It's more like the deck has a series of different commanders that are all historic permanents, or what we would say key pieces. And Rona lets you buy back those pieces if you have enough mana once they go to the graveyard. So you can get back one of the many Tezzeret planeswalkers, you can get back one of our many incredibly powerful artifacts, and try to go again after our opponents are interacting with us. Now, it does have, to a certain extent, some problems with it in the sense that if our permanents are exiled, they're gone forever, but that's not very common. And we sometimes still have a chance to get her out there and exile that permanent. And of course, if we lose Rona, right, we should be able to... No, we don't. That's a good question. Do we get to cast other things off of Rona? It won't be a... Yeah, okay. Okay, because this is correct. I thought so. Because it says exiled with Rona, and in Magic cards, when you write the name of the card, it means this card, not cards of this type. So it's not like all Ronas, right? So specifically this copy of Rona, so when she leaves play and returns, she will not be able to see the other cards. So we have to use her pretty surgically, I would say. And so let's take a look at the deck. What kind of deck does this commander use? And I do really, really like this deck. There's a few outliers, but generally the deck is very, very strong. We have a very, very strong collection of artifacts, generally around Proliferate, around cheating out things or cheating out on mana, and getting advantages by proliferating a bunch of different charge token cards. And I think there's just a lot of things here that are very good. I played a game where I've seen John, what did he do? With Unwinding Clock, a bunch of Cornucopia and Chalice style artifacts, and then what was it? The Planar Bridge, all together to be able to put out a permanent every single turn. Now, that didn't work out for him in that specific game, but it does show the kind of power that is available in a deck like this. And then in our creatures, we have a lot of really strong creatures and a lot of strange creatures, which we're gonna try to pick apart. I did pick at John's mind, and there's a lot of choices here that feel kind of flavor or proliferate. The large Tezzeret collection is because Tezzeret's favorite planeswalker, which something tells me there's deeply something wrong if Tezzeret's your favorite, but I won't hate on him too much. I like Sorin, so what can I say? Definitely, they're not all of equal power. I think we're going to try to keep them all in, though, because it is kind of the point of the deck. And then we're going to see what we can do to kind of further support this Planeswalker situation. And you might notice our only instant is Steady Progress. We're probably going to do something about that. It just feels like the right thing to do. So let's go piece by piece and see what we can do. This deck, more than any, I do recommend you open it up and take a look if you haven't seen this deck before, because it has a lot of really cool synergies that I just won't have time to go through and explain every different thing. All right. So let's see. Let's start with the simple thing that our lands are a bit low. I wouldn't mind going up to at least 36 lands. We have a lot of fast mana in this deck, so we do have a lot of options to make mana really, really quickly, but I still wouldn't mind going up just a bit further because we have the means to. We have a lot of really strong cards and a lot of higher cost cards that, yes, we want to cheat out and play by making more and more fast mana, but it doesn't hurt to kind of support ourselves in that direction. Looking at the curve, I think the curve is really rather good. 3 mana is really high, but at the same time, we don't play our commander primarily as like a proactive play. We play her reactively, so I don't particularly mind that that's one of the higher costs of the deck. 4 mana being a bit higher is a bit questionable. Now, a few of these have Phyrexian costs, so they're actually 3 mana, but it is something that's worth considering. So let's look at a few cards, or a few sections of cards that I think are interesting and worth talking about. So one of the cards here we can see with Steel Overseer, Chief of the Foundry, Yogg for a certain aspect, are cards that are really dependent on having a very large army of 1/1 creatures. Even Master of Ethereum, to an extent, is like this if you don't want him to be just a big beater. So these cards depend on having a very big army, and the deck itself really does not have the means to create this very, very large army. We can make like Thopters here and there with Tezzeret. We can make Thopters out of the Hangerback Walker. We have Urza's Saga in order to get a few constructs out, things like that, and a few other things make golems, but it's all just a lot of work to try to pay it off with a card like Chief of the Foundry. So I think I would get rid of the Chief, and I do like Steel Overseer a little more because we can proliferate those counters, but personally, if I had the choice, I think I would still get rid of them. I think we can just put much better things in its place. Yogg also, I believe, should come out. I think Yogg's main power is by sacrificing, not so much the Proliferate secondary ability. So I think this is a deck that doesn't really use him to the greatest extent. I will also suggest that we can notice here that this is one of the few black spells in the deck. There's actually just not that many. And so to be using Yogg in this way feels like a bit of a mistake. I also think it's really interesting. This is something I hadn't really thought of when I was making additions, but there's just not a lot of black. And black's my favorite color, so I take that incredibly personally. Looking past that, there's a few cards in here that I think feel a bit cute for the strength of the rest of the deck. Once again, this is a deck that can easily assemble, where are we? Aetherflux Winds. It can easily assemble... I keep missing it. I know it's here. The Planar Bridge. Planar Bridge combos and just like putting out tons and tons of cards. It has Bolas' Citadel. It just can do so much. So there is a notable amount of artifacts that just feel like, they kind of feel like misses, like they're just I'm not quite sure why they're here. Things like Commander Sphere is just, I feel a little too cute for this power level of deck. Even with the sacrifice ability, I'd rather this be Felwar Stone or the 3 mana Thought Vessel just as a second copy if you really want that 3 mana thing. But here it just feels a little clunky. I think I'd just be happier with Felwar Stone. Conversion Chamber as well is a golem generator that requires first 2 mana and an exile in order to get it going, and then with Proliferation, you don't have to keep putting additional counters that way, but in order to create the 3/3, you need to pay another 2. And this just feels really, really clunky. Like, don't get me wrong. Once this deck is functional, mana is not a problem. You can generate tons and tons of mana, and turn after turn, you can just churn out golems, but this really doesn't do anything outside of those kind of scenarios. When you're not ahead, this just kind of sits there and just demands mana from you. And it's not really something when it's the setup phase, you have a lot of like the setup portion of the game, you don't really have the means to be just, pooling your mana into a card like this. So I think this is one I would definitely cut. Especially when we compare it to like Golem Foundry, which is whenever you cast an artifact spell, you get a charge counter, and then for every 3 charge counters, you get a 3/3. This is just 3 to play, and after the fact, you can just kind of let it go, and it's a free, not free, you still have to pay the original cost for it, but it is an interesting kind of generation, because like it's not so much based on proliferation, because you need to proliferate 3 times, but it's how many artifacts you can kind of just start burning through and casting and storming off. So though I like it a lot more, personally, I still don't love it. It's still a lot of work for a 3/3. I think there's a reason this is a common card, and I don't really see it as much. Titan Forge, we're still in the same kind of vibe, but Titan Forge creates 9/9s instead of 3/3s. Now this one's really interesting because once again, this is a mix of the previous 2, where like the first one, you need to do something to get that initial charge counter on it, and then after which you don't need to pay any cost but tapping it to create a 9/9. Is there a situation that this is better, this is worse than the Golem Foundry? And I think it's possible, right? If you can create 4 golems in a turn cycle, I think that is better than, because that's 12 power, whereas this is just 9/9. And the main reason I'm saying that is because Titan's Forge has to tap to function, whereas the other one doesn't, and you can just keep making golems as long as you can keep up that cost of proliferating. Now, is that easy? No, it's not. And maybe you need to do something with like Mox Amber, which actually isn't in the deck, or one of these 0 cast cards where you can keep putting it back into your hand, casting it. And I don't think that's really worth it. I think it's just kind of fine. So with that in mind, Titan Forge kind of feels like, I don't know. I feel like it's one of the weaker of the options. And at this point, I don't want to just take them all out, but I just don't see these golem generate, like Titans, even the 9/9s, they feel so clunky in a deck that's going to spend this deck spends almost all of its time setting up, and then it just tries to go off and win the game, right? And what's interesting about that is that, do you really care about creating 9/9s in the meantime? Like, all you're going to do is put kind of a bigger target on your back, or force your opponents to kind of deal with you because you're swinging 9/9s at them, right? And I just don't think that's worth the loss of political power, or like the loss of your, how would I put this? Like staying under the radar. And so I think this might be a card I think that just is more dangerous than it's worth putting in a deck like this. So I would like to cut that for sure. Let's see. Titan Forge, Reservoir, and Power Auto Generator is something that's really, really interesting. I saw this do a lot of work with Unwinding Clock, recently, and so I'm just really impressed by it. I can't believe this is just $2. However, something I don't like that works really well with the Unwinding Clock is the Lux Cannon. So, how do we use Lux Cannon? Lux Cannon, once again, is another one of these cards that requires some setup and then has a payoff. But the payoff is, instead of creating golems, we destroy permanents. So I like that a lot more. I will admit that. That's a lot stronger. However, I find this card to be a lot clunkier than the others because it demands a lot of attention. This is a very scary card for all your opponents because they're just going to assume you're going to blow up their lands or their own or the permanents they care about. So Lux Cannon is just like a very, very telegraph vindicate most of the time because it doesn't usually stick around for more than one, activation. Speaking of vindicates, to a certain extent, with Beast Within, Stroke of Midnight, Generous Gifts, all of these cards, we have such a easy way to deal with these kind of cards like Lux Cannon, like non-creature permanents that we used to not be able to, that Lux Cannon is just not bound to stick around for a really, really long time. So in my mind, when I play this card, I would like to see how often it vindicates, and then how often it vindicates a second time. And I think that's just not what's going to happen. I think we lose this a lot. And I'll ask John about this. Well, I'll get him to watch the video, obviously, and he'll tell me. But I just don't know if this is particularly good. Like, once again, this is a card that's amazing when you have all the setup. You have several proliferation effects. You have Unwinding Clock. You're doing it 2 or 3 times a turn cycle. Like, that's a lot, but it's really, really strong. Like, there, it's really, really strong. But think of all of the work you had to do to put this together, right? Now here now, I should say, it's just been too much. It's been too much work to get a few Vindicates in it, and you're already winning the game. Why are you wasting your time with the Lux Cannon? Is what my brain says. And so with that in mind, I'd like to cut the cannon. All right, Ring of 3 Wishes. I feel like this could be Demonic Tutor. I know he has Demonic Tutors. Or if not, Profane Tutor. There's just a lot of better tutors than this one in black that we can grab. Like, we're not using all those black cards. We might as well be using them here. Don't get me wrong. This is immensely powerful with the untap effects, with the proliferation, with turn after turn you're tutoring. But I just think we can do a little better, right? Like, this is just so slow and so clunky, and only works after we've set up. Whereas if you throw down Profane Tutor or something early on, and you just wait those 2 turns, you'll get the right card you need at the right time. Is the One Ring in here? I imagine the One Ring should eventually be in here as well. That makes me think. I didn't think to suggest this. What is that? Tempting Mirror, is it? What is that mirror that we just saw? Beseech the Mirror. Should Beseech the Mirror be in here? I think so. I think so. This card should definitely be in here. It's a bit hard for the deck to cast, but it should be able to tutor nearly anything that wins you the game, especially a lot of the really strong ones like Unwinding Clock, Mystic Forge, Aether Flux. Yeah, Beseech the Mirror should be in here as long as you can generate the mana. Looking at our last few, we've got Bolas' Citadel, which is fantastic. Contagion Engine, which I find clunky personally, but if we're cheating it into play through the Planar Bridge, I don't think it's that bad. But 4 mana to proliferate, then proliferate again. I think that's lost a lot of power. I know it's still $20. I own a copy of this card, and I just never play it. It's just so clunky. 4 mana, like, it's 10 total mana. Less if you cheat it into play. I don't know. I'm not too impressed by it. Obviously, once again, this is just really, really strong when you have the Unwinding Clock combo and you're doing this over and over again every turn cycle. You're proliferating, what, like 8 times a turn cycle with this card alone? Yes, that's fantastic, but I just think it's a little clunky. So to me, I'm just not too interested in it. Planar Bridge, fantastic. Spine of Ishsa. I like this a lot more, because I think this has interesting combos. You can sacrifice it. It just straight up vindicates as opposed to Lux Cannon where you have to wait. It is kind of just generic artifact card, but I do really, really like it. And I think this is fine. But, I mean, you could apply all my arguments I've made to other things onto this. And if you do, I don't think it's very good. I don't think it's good anymore. I think in slower metas and old Commander, this used to be very, very good, but now not so much. I do love the flavor of this card. This reminds me of a MMO I used to play, Guild Wars, where you could see the spines of like sleeping dragons in the mountains, and it always gave me this vibe of being very small. And I feel like the spine of Ishsa is very much like that. like whatever it is, it's not the creature, right? It's just a piece of the creature, and as it just kind of moves or I don't know, rummages around in its sleep, it's causing like untold destruction. I think that's so cool. So obviously I like the card is the reason I'm going to keep it in, but if I didn't like the card, I probably wouldn't. Finally, we have Darksteel Forge, and this is very much so a a polarizing card. I really don't like it. I think it is a lot of work to do nothing. At least Avacyn can attack, Darksteel Forge cannot. So I personally don't like it, but it does set up situations where traditionally you cannot lose the game because all of your cards are now very difficult to interact with. However, you can still just lose the game by your opponents beating you out of the game, and I think that's probably what's going to happen if you're trying to play this fairly. But if you can cheat this in, I don't know. If you can cheat this in, this is fantastic. But it's a card I personally don't very much so like. Looking through almost everything else I generally like. I'm trying to see if there's anything else that just catches my eye. I think Steady Progress is just too much work for what it is. We can do much better nowadays. We've had so many Proliferate sets since then. Steady Progress just feels cute. Jin Gataxias. I do like this here for the flavor. Is that all I like it for? The ceiling is very high on this card. It is very disruptive. We cannot quite protect it well, but it kind of protects itself. So yeah, if you can play this, your opponent loses their first attempt to destroy it, then they cast a second one. So they'll burn a spell in their hand, basically. They have to pay full mana. They'll cast, like, I don't know, Soul Ring, let it get countered, and then they're going to cast, I don't know, like Swords to Plowshares or something on this. So outside of, I say specifically Swords to Plowshares, because if they beast within it, you can just use Rona to get them get Jin Gataxias back. Are you okay with that if that happens? I think you're still fine with that. I think it's disruptive enough. The problem is it's just another card that attracts a lot of attention on your side. And I think Jin Gataxias is really good in mid-range aggro shells, just like how I like to play Elesh Norn. You're playing aggressively, you're playing proactively, you're playing to the board, you drop your Praetor, and you're now in a very advantageous position where all your opponents are really struggling to kind of deal with both your board and your Praetor. And I don't think this is that kind of deck. I think this is a setup and payoff deck, and Jin Gataxias is just kind of clumsy protection, right? I think I'd rather like a counter spell or several counter spells or some kind of ward, or even the indestructible ability, I think, from Darksteel Forge does this better. So that's that. Looking at anything else before we go into my additions, I do think things like Tezzeret Artifice Master is one of the weaker Tezzerets. After that, likewise, Betrayer of the Flesh is also one of the weaker ones. I think that static ability feels really juicy, but isn't always going to be that much of a payoff, because if you really think about it, like you have to use the plus and you have to use the static ability immediately to gain some kind of ability. I don't know. I think, is it each turn or each of your turns? Each turn. Okay, I can see that being a little better. You still have to set up for this card, and Planeswalkers are very vulnerable in Commander, but I do like it a bit more. Okay, I'm fine on this. All right, let's go into additions. And I've got, let's see, a little more than a dozen, I think. So let's go with the first one that I just personally really like. I mean, it's Rona. Why can't we put another Rona in here? I like this Rona in here because I think she's just a way to start building into the combo you want. Ledger Shredder could do a very similar thing here, is probably better, but it's Rona. Why not play another Rona in your Rona card? And then, of course, you have a pretty neat other side of Rona that you can turn into a Smasher, though you probably won't. Now, you do have legendary spells, so I think you can get multiple triggers out, but do I really want you to play this? Not really, but I think it would be cute otherwise. Is that all of our Ronas? Are we missing one? There was one more Rona, right? It was like Rona Shieldred. Yeah, Rona Shieldred's Faithful. Yeah, this doesn't work with the deck. Okay. All right. I'm assuming she's dead. I don't think it was mentioned in the story. She's turned full Phyrexian, and then all the Phyrexians were turned off. I have to assume she's dead, but that's not necessarily true. She's not like the invaders. She doesn't run the same way. Like she doesn't need a signal from Elshnorn to function. So if she's not dead, she's definitely not dead. So I wonder what the answer to that is. All right, here's one that I recently looked at that I thought is a really interesting inclusion is Senator Peacock. I think this is neat because it turns one resource you have into another using a resource you have an abundance of. So all of a sudden, all of your artifacts are clues, which I really, really like, especially if we can still go back and use like occasional Thopters, but I think we're fine with any form of card here being an additional draw card. And we can use our abundance of mana to turn those cards into draw easily. And so when we are close to going off, this is really good. And when we're half going off, this is fantastic. This is not very good in the setup portion, but she is 5 mana, so you don't really play her as setup. You play her as kind of a payoff. And I think it's interesting to have her in here. She's kind of a neat... This is one of my spicy takes, and I think John had asked for spicy takes, and I think this one is the spiciest, probably. I think it's interesting. Is it going to be good? I don't know, but it really catches my eye as something that this deck can do. It's also obviously a legendary creature, so historic comes back. I should mention that about Rona as well. These are both historic permanents, which is really, really nice, so getting them back is pretty easy. All right, Mycosynth Lattice. This is something I talked to him about recently. He plays Karn, not Liberated, sorry, Karn Great Creator, and does not play Mycosynth Lattice. You should do that. Some people find this to be unfair, to completely just end a game and they won't concede. Those people, that's rough. This is definitely a way to win a game. I like winning. I don't care how I win. I don't care how anyone wins. The best part of a game of Magic is when it ends, and then you get to play another game of Magic. And Mycosynth Lattice is just really, really good at this. You play it, everyone's lands and activated abilities are all shut down. They can still cast a few things if they're really, really lucky, but most likely with Karn, they're completely out of the game. All they have is their attackers that are still in play, and as long as you can deal with those, the game is over. I was talking to John about this one time, and he was mentioning that, sometimes he'd play this and people wouldn't concede. And so no one ever needs to concede. This is another spicy kind of situation, but don't ever expect that your opponents have to concede. It's not going to happen. But if you set up a lock and the game's over and like 2 of the 3 players concede and one person's like stubbornly like, no, I want you to take 5 turns by yourself to slowly show me a way you defeat me. You can concede. Like, you won. The game's over. You don't need to continue playing that game. If you're not playing competitively or for prizes or anything, anytime you've won a game, you can just say, no, it's fine, we'll shuffle up. Like, you won. You don't need to prove it to anyone. I don't know. That's my opinion on that. But so for that, Mycosynth Lattice, I think definitely belongs in a deck like this. If nothing else, it is just kind of a proactive piece with things like Unwinding Clock, but also fixes everyone's mana, just be aware of that. But it is a rather interesting card. Remember if people have a lot of mana out and you can't cheat this out into play, like with Planar Bridge or something, all of a sudden all of their mana is fixed, and they have access to all of their cards at instant speed. So there are ways they can play around this. Just be aware of that. Okay. Moving on, something that I find to be notably missing is Power Conduit. I really like Power Conduit. I've seen it in a few modern decks recently, and I think it does a very, very good job. But beyond that, I just think it's a pretty solid card. Like, it works really, really well with Proliferate because it represents a spreading of resources, which is something Proliferate does really well. Like, Proliferate benefits when you have a ton of targets, not one with a lot of counters on it. So Power Conduit lets you spread the counters around and get more and more triggers and get like ahead. Also, as anyone knows, when you Power Conduit onto like either the Chalice or the Cornucopia, you are really speeding up your process of getting a ton of mana. So this I find to be just very, very good and notably missing, I would say. Speaking of notably missing, Tribute Mage. We're playing all the other mages. We're playing Trinket Mage, we're playing Trophy Mage, we're playing Treasure Mage. Why not Tribute Mage? I know there's like a peak on how many of these will be, at what point they'll be good and what point they're just, that's my very loud phone, as I had to take a call earlier and I put the ringer on like a fool. All right, so there is a peak or like a plateau of how good these cards get, but I think in your deck there's just so many different targets to grab, and Tribute Mage notably grabs cards like, well, Power Conduit, but also, let's see, Throne of Geth. I guess that's the only two. Did I add anything else that makes it? I guess I do really like Power Conduit, and I wouldn't mind getting a tutor for it. Okay, if you also really like Power Conduit, you can always play Tribute Mage, but I think maybe it grabs less than I anticipated. And with that thought, how about instead using Whir of Invention? This was a card that bounced around for a really long time in a bunch of formats, and I always thought it was insanely good, but it just doesn't seem to be the case. I just don't see this played. Like, why? This is just such a strong card. Maybe I just don't. I think it's because you have to pay the 3 blue, whereas Chord, you do not have to do that. You can just use creatures. So you always have to pay 3 blue for this. But in a commander deck, I think you have the means to do this. Very strong getting the last piece of your combo or proactively getting a piece that you need right now to help building. Just really good card. You can play it over Tribute Mage. Grab your Power Conduit. You'll be pretty happy with the results. Then I have 2 cards here that are kind of standing in for other cards. Arcane Denial's here for counter magic. I think this deck could benefit from counter magic. Arcane Denial is the one I thought of first because it does replace itself, and you do want to keep building instead of going down a card as you go on, and you don't really mind your opponents drawing 2 cards because you just need to get to the point where you can start winning. So this card's good. I think you could play like the Swan Song, Dispel. What is that other one? An Offer You Can't Refuse. These cards work really well in a deck like this because you're trying to go off. So you don't really mind giving your opponents things in the meantime. But I think you could play 2 to 3 counter spells very well. And I think likewise with Pognify, this is representing, Pognify, the rapid hybridization. My goodness. And I think there's that new 2 mana, discard a card or lose 3 life, destroy target creature or permanent in black. Play those 3. That should be fine. You need to be able to destroy things. And Lux Cannon is it's just not fast enough. I think destroying other permanents could be a bit tough, but we do have some means to do that if you need it. But I think generally just being able to destroy a few creatures here and there, I think it's going to be a big difference. That's just something that this deck kind of struggles to deal with. And I'd rather like the precision low mana options. And if you wanted, you could play like Damnation, but I don't think that's as necessary. You just need to just stay under the radar for a few turns, and then you're going to be getting so much advantage that all you need is to like pick some very specific targets and move on. So that's in mind. Something I was thinking, though, I'm not sure so much anymore, Dark Ritual. I just really don't believe that a black deck shouldn't play this card, which makes it a bit boring, but at the same time, especially with so many colorless sources, I think it's just rather good. The ability to Dark Ritual into something early, I think, is worthwhile, especially at 2 mana where you can make 4 mana, which enables you to start, like, putting down Everflowing Chalice for 4, or grabbing Aetherflux. Once again, we've gone through the 4 mana cards. There's some really, really good ones here. But I also like, turn 1 Astral Cornucopia right away is kind of neat for sure, because then you can start proliferating it and using whatever means you want to take advantage of it. And I do really, really like that. Okay, the next 2 cards are ones that I think are rather interesting, but are notably missing, and that's Voltaic Key and Manifold Key. The ability to untap your artifacts feels so good in this deck that I find it just a little bit missing that these aren't in here. They're just very, very high value. They're able to be pulled out by, where are we? Urza's Saga. I think there's a lot you can do with a card like this. and get away with, you know, a lot. This is just a card. These are just cards that generate tons of mana, tons of effects. This extra text is kind of cute, but you don't worry too much about it. Imagine being able to generate enough mana to untap the planar bridge and do it again. These are the kind of things I really like. But in the meantime, you can use it to kind of, where are we? Play Power Conduit, use Power Conduit, untap Power Conduit, and do it again in a turn cycle early on. And I do really, really like that. I think that is rather, rather strong. Finally, something that I think is very notably missing is Ichor Moon Gauntlet. I think this is a really, really strong card. Now, generally, I tend to look at the second line of text and not the first one, which says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, choose a counter on a permanent. So like proliferate on a single permanent. And I think that's very, very good, especially with the number of non-creature permanents that we have. Do we want our planeswalkers to proliferate? Sometimes. Sometimes. Not very, very often, but sometimes. Enough that I think that first line of text is worthwhile, but really we're playing it for that -12, take an extra turn kind of thing. It's hard to set up. Basically, this card adds a ultimate to all your planeswalkers, and I do really, really like that. Now, it's rather expensive because people really like their planeswalker decks, but I think this is just a pretty good card in the deck for its second line, with the added benefit of just occasionally being able to take an extra turn. So I think this should be in here for sure. I think it's a lot of fun. And the last cards I wanted to add is kind of a pair of cards. And this one is a bit contentious, I think, because I just don't know what John thinks about this, but I'm going to throw it in anyways, is that both of these cards are poison counter cards. You play either of them, and immediately your opponents have a poison counter. Now, what is the benefit of this? It scares your opponents. That's the main benefit. It terrifies them, and that's really fun to do. But two, it is an alternative win con when you have enough proliferate, right? You can slowly proliferate your opponents out of the game. They're going to see it coming. It's going to be slow, and it's going to be painful. But it does give some credence to cards like Contagion Engine, which allow us to get to that point really, really fast. But I think this is a card that if you play it right, you can do like in 1.5 turn cycles, you can poison everyone out of the game. They're really interesting in that regard. I really, really like that they're kind of like their setups and punchlines all in one, and they just if you play them right, they're good. My problem is if these cards are played wrong, they just increase your threat level dramatically. And John plays really well, so I'm willing to tell him to play this, but they're really interesting in decks like this. I don't think you should always play them, but I don't think you should completely sleep on them. And with that in mind, that is going to be, my thoughts on the deck. I think the deck is already in a really good place. I'm not too sure what the exact cards that have been taken out and added since I saw it last are. So if this list isn't 100% correct, there's probably some decisions here that I've made wrong. But off of this version, I think it's pretty good. I think there's a lot of fun things you can do, and I think these additions are pretty natural and allow the deck to kind of do some sillier things. I think at most, if there could be more of a conversation on its control options and its ability to hold down the fort with more counter magic, removal, board clears. But at the moment, I think as a proactive kind of sneak under the radar deck, I think it does really, really well. I think the obvious, if we want to ratchet up the power level, the obvious ideas would be tutors, would be, what were they? Oh yeah, like cards like Rhystic Study, Mystic Remora, Necropotence, those kind of cards let us just reach a bunch further. Necropotence I don't really see in a deck like this because of the black mana in it, but it's something worth considering. I would also say 10 islands, 8 swamps feels wrong in the current build of the deck. I think you could really go 15 islands, 3 swamps, and not really feel that much of a... Well, I guess we don't have any other... Yeah, okay, if we can get some blue-black lands in this deck... Hi, I'd like to request a few more blue-black lands. I think, honestly, if we could just get, like, a few blue-black lands, it would be fine to cut down on some swamps, because we just have so few black spells that I really don't want this many swamps. All right, thank you so much, John, for sending the deck. I do really like it. I'm excited to see what you do with it. And if you would ever want to see what I would do with another draft, or send another draft of any deck, there's a link in the video description down below. If you could like, comment, subscribe, I'd be ever so grateful. Those views and those likes really do make me very happy and mean a lot to me. I had to re-upload a video today because I left a blooper in, and I was so ashamed and so upset that I had to basically delete like 20 views. That might seem really silly, but like those views matter to me. People watch that. So any interaction is always good on the YouTube. And yeah, I look forward to the next few decks we're working on, and good luck with Rona.